Ghost stories that scared the shit out of you, personal or otherwise. I'll start. When I was 15, I had one remaining activity to complete for my Bronze Duke of Edinburgh award, the expedition. Basically, this involved a 2-day hike in the wilderness, 1 day and 1 night. I was fortunate to be one of the younger members of our 9-person group. I kind of took a back seat in a lot of the decision-making, so it was pretty cruisy. All I had to do was keep up with the crowd, demonstrate my knowledge and training, and stick to the plan. Day 1. So off we set, after being dropped off in the highlands of Bonnie, Scotland. I can't remember the exact distance we had to cover by evening, but we set a fairly brisk pace and everyone seemed well up to the task. We had decided to make camp on government land, pretty much in the middle of nowhere. There was the occasional sign of previous habitation in the area, the odd raised/dilapidated foundations peeking out of the heather. At around 6 p.m. we entered what I can only describe as a long, upward sloping shallow valley. It was around 300 meters wide and a few kilometers long. One side was about half the height of the other, and behind the shorter side was going to be the final resting place of the slowly setting spring sun. It's at this time that I noticed a member of our group, Ben, looking a little uncertain/uncomfortable, straining his eyes, looking way off into the distance, seemingly transfixed on the top of the slope with the sun setting behind it. I couldn't make out what he was staring at. I asked him if everything was okay, and he quietly replied, "Uh-huh." At around 6:45, the sky was darkening and the sun was a few widths above the slope. We were in the process of setting up camp, tents, fire, etc., when we saw a figure approaching from down the other slope. The team leader got up to meet the person approaching the camp, and we all fell silent to listen in on what was being said. Turns out he was a local, a farmer, I assume, out walking and just wanted to have a friendly chat. There was a brief exchange of pleasantries, the usual, who we were, what we were doing, etc. The guy had lived in the area for most of his life. Before he left, he told the team leader that it was not a great idea staying in this particular area. Didn't elaborate on why exactly, and suggested that we go with him a few kilometers away and stay at a local campsite. We advised that we couldn't do that, and we had to adhere to our plan in order to qualify for our award. It was at this time that I became quite concerned with Ben. Now, I'm quite an empathic person. I can always read people's states/moods within a few moments of meeting them. I also pick up on any personality changes very easily. Ben had me quite worried because as soon as we'd entered this valley, he'd effectively shut up completely. He looked worried. This made me want to find out why, as it was unsettling me too. He was still blanking the group, back turned to the campfire, still staring up the slope. He looked like he was in a trance, fully mesmerized. It was getting much darker now, and I decided to sit next to him and try to see what he was transfixed on. I could sort of make out a tree-shaped object, but not many branches, very dark and about 4 people tall. I tapped Ben on the shoulder and he snapped round to stare me in the eyes. He looked scared/absent. "What is it?" I asked him. "Can you see that?" he queried, pointing to the top of the slope. "What, that tree?" I suggested. He moved back to his original position and didn't say anything for a few moments. "I think it's getting closer," he said quietly. He was deadpan, serious. This made the hairs on my arms stand up on end. What an odd thing to say. With a cocked eyebrow, I turned back around and resumed the campfire banter. At around 8, the sun finally disappeared behind the hill and it became colder and almost completely dark. The moon was out. It was also a clear night, no clouds and no wind. Quite a nice Scottish night, actually. I once again checked on Ben, who was still sitting there staring up the slope. A couple of other team members had inquired as to why he was being antisocial, but they got the same weird statements. Something moving, something getting closer. To be honest, at this stage in the evening, I couldn't see anything clearly up the slope anymore. Maybe a trace outline of an object. Being guys under 17, away from home, we decided that the 9:30 curfew was way too early. Everyone was having a great time, ironically telling ghost stories, which put us on edge. But as we were in a big group and sleeping in 3-man tents, no one was particularly freaked out, except Ben. I was periodically checking on him, the odd glance his way every half hour or so. A few times I sat next to him and asked him to just ignore what was bothering him. All he kept saying was, "It's getting closer." At around 10 p.m. I humored him and tried to make out what he was looking at. I got my mag light and shone it up the slope. I could make out the tree, barely, and I don't know if the light was playing tricks on me, but it did look closer. I told Ben we would check it out in the morning. So finally, at around 10:50, myself and Ben were sitting around the dying campfire, and I pretty much ordered him to go to bed. He was totally freaked out. I considered it my responsibility now to make sure he got to sleep and was safe. Please see the tent diagram. This is important. As you can see, Ben was sleeping the furthest away from the door. Soon I was fast asleep. Suddenly I was jolted awake by a harrowing scream. The tent was freezing. The door to the tent was flapping in a calm breeze. Ben was lying across both myself and Darren's legs, unconscious. I sat there in the darkness, slowly becoming aware that Ben had pissed himself, and the side of my sleeping bag was warm and moist. Darren pushed Ben's legs over to his sleeping bag and tried to close the tent. I tried to wake up Ben. Initially, it was futile. It took me a good 5 minutes to get him to come around, and he was totally freaked out. More scared than I have ever seen anyone in my life. All he kept saying was that she tried to take me, and other permutations of some woman trying to lift him out of the tent. Whilst recounting, Darren was trying desperately to get the tent door zipped up, but to no avail. He ended up putting a safety pin in it. Suffice it to say, both Darren and I were speechless and terrified. So much so that we didn't leave the tent until first light, and somehow we all managed to drift off until then. Well, at around 6:30 a.m. I once again awoke. Ben was lying face down on top of his sleeping bag, shivering. Darren and I were both pretty groggy, but remembered everything that had happened at 3 to 4 a.m. The team leader called out for everyone to get up and come and get breakfast on the go. It was then that we started to notice some bizarre, out-of-place things about the tent. 1. The top of the tent was singed, like if you were to get a spray can and use a lighter for about 2 seconds. Just enough to melt, but not burn. 2. The door zipper had melted. No burn marks, just warped plastic. The fly sheet at the entrance of the tent was singed black. 3. As Ben stirred and looked at me, I noticed he had blisters on his forehead. He did not look good. So, skip an hour or so. We had all eaten, and Ben finally decided to tell us what had happened to him after much encouragement from me. What he said freaked us out big time, but it didn't stop there. Basically, he'd been fixated on something up the slope that he felt was drawing him in. He couldn't take his eyes away from this thing. He'd become convinced that whatever he was staring at was moving, albeit very slowly, towards our camp. After finally getting to sleep, he was suddenly awoken by an intense heat. He said that he could see light behind his eyelids, on his face. Apparently, he was face to face with what he describes as a woman all in black, screaming at him, engulfed in flames. She was trying to get him to help her, begging for him to take her hand. He, of course, had a complete sensory overload and passed out. Everyone, bar us 3, was highly skeptical to say the least. It wasn't until we showed everyone the tent that doubts began to creep into the minds of the doubters. So, with increasing haste, our camp was packed up, a record dismantling in my opinion. The fire was doused with water and we were very keen to get out of the area ASAP. It was with some encouragement from Darren and I that the team leader hesitantly decided to come with 4 others to see what was on top of that slope. Well, it was a fair trek, about 500 meters, but we eventually got there. I shit you not, I was gobsmacked by what we discovered, for, standing solitary, like a pillar of black, was a tree that had been fashioned into a post. It was caked in soot and cinders, and at its base was a plaque. The plaque read something like this: Here stands, some Celtic name, post, a place used to burn witches from XY. 103 witches were burned here. Sorry, I don't remember the exact words. Needless to say, we found ourselves at the bottom of that slope pretty damn quickly. To this day, I swear that this happened. It's the closest I've come to seeing a ghost.